Chapter 41. The Presentation. When Albert found himself alone with Monte Cristo, "My dear Count," said he, "allow me to commence my services as cicerone by showing you a specimen of bachelor's apartment. You, who are accustomed to the palaces of Italy, can amuse yourself by calculating in how many square feet a young man, who is not the worst lodged in Paris, can live. As we pass from one room to another, I will open the windows to let you breathe." Monte Cristo had already seen the breakfast room and the salon on the ground floor. Albert led him first to his atelier, which was, as we have said, his favourite apartment. Monte Cristo quickly appreciated all that Albert had collected here: old cabinets, Japanese porcelain, oriental stuffs, Venetian glass, arms from all parts of the world. Everything was familiar to him, and at the first glance he recognized their date, their country, and their origin. Morcerf had expected he should be the guide. On the contrary, it was he who, under the Count's guidance, followed a course of archaeology, mineralogy, and natural history. They descended to the first floor. Albert led his guest into the salon. The salon was filled with works of modern artists. There was landscapes by Dupré, with their long reeds and tall trees, their lowing oxen and marvellous skies; Delacroix, Arabian cavaliers, with their long white burnouses, their shining belts, their damasked arms, their horses who tore each other with their teeth while their riders contended fiercely with their maces; aquarelles of Boulanger representing Notre Dame de Paris, with that vigour that makes the artist the rival of the poet. There were paintings by Diaz, who makes his flowers more beautiful than flowers, his suns more brilliant than the sun; designs by Decamps, as vividly coloured as those of Salvator Rosa, but more poetic; pastels by Giraud and Muller, representing children like angels and women with the features of a virgin; sketches torn from the album of Dazets, Travels in the East, that had been made in a few seconds on the saddle of a camel, or beneath the dome of a mosque. In a word, all that modern art can give in exchange and as recompense for the art lost and gone with ages long since past. Albert expected to have something new this time to show to the traveller, but to his great surprise the latter, without seeking for the signatures, many of which indeed were only initials, named instantly the author of every picture in such a manner that it was easy to see that each name was not only known to him, but that each style associated with it had been appreciated and studied by him. From the salon they passed into the bedchamber. It was a model of taste and simple elegance. A single portrait, signed by Leopold Robert, shone in its carved and gilded frame. This portrait attracted the Count of Monte Cristo's attention, for he made 3 rapid steps in the chamber, and stopped suddenly before it. It was the portrait of a young woman of 5 or 26, with a dark complexion and light and lustrous eyes, veiled beneath long lashes. She wore the picturesque costume of the Catalan fisherwoman, a red and black bodice and gold pins in her hair. She was looking at the sea, and her form was outlined on the blue ocean and sky. The light was so faint in the room that Albert did not perceive the pallor that spread itself over the Count's visage, or the nervous heaving of his chest and shoulders. Silence prevailed for an instant, during which Monte Cristo gazed intently on the picture. "You have their most charming mistress, Viscount," said the Count in a perfectly calm tone, "and this costume, a ball costume doubtless, becomes her admirably." "Ah, monsieur," returned Albert, "I would never forgive you this mistake if you had seen another picture beside this. You do not know my mother. She it is whom you see here. She had her portrait painted thus 6 or 8 years ago. This costume is a fancy one, it appears, and the resemblance is so great that I think I still see my mother the same as she was in 1830. The Countess had this portrait painted during the Count's absence. She doubtless intended giving him an agreeable surprise, but, strange to say, this portrait seemed to displease my father, and the value of the picture, which is, as you see, one of the best works of Leopold Robert, could not overcome his dislike to it. It is true, between ourselves, that Monsieur de Morcerf is one of the most assiduous peers at the Luxembourg, a general renowned for theory, but a most mediocre amateur of art. It is different with my mother, who paints exceedingly well, and who, unwilling to part with so valuable a picture, gave it to me to put here, where it would be less likely to displease Monsieur de Morcerf, whose portrait by Gros I will also show you. Excuse my talking of family matters, but as I shall have the honour of introducing you to the Count, I tell you this to prevent you making any allusions to this picture. The picture seems to have a malign influence, for my mother rarely comes here without looking at it, and still more rarely does she look at it without weeping. This disagreement is the only one that has ever taken place between the Count and Countess, who are still as much united, although married more than 20 years, as on the first day of their wedding. Monte Cristo glanced rapidly at Albert as if to seek a hidden meaning in his word, but it was evident the young man uttered them in the simplicity of his heart. "Now," said Albert, "that you have seen all my treasures, allow me to offer them to you, as unworthy as they are. Consider yourself as in your own house, and to put yourself still more at ease, pray accompany me to the apartments of Monsieur de Morcerf, he whom I wrote from Rome on account of the services you rendered me, and to whom I announced your promised visit. And I may say that both the Count and Countess anxiously desire to thank you in person. You are somewhat blasé, I know, and family scenes have not much effect on Sinbad the sailor, who has seen so many others. However, accept what I propose to you as an invitation into Parisian life, a life of politeness, visiting, and introductions." Monte Cristo bowed without making any answer. He accepted the offer without enthusiasm and without regret, as one of those conventions of society which every gentleman looks upon as a duty. Albert summoned his servant and ordered him to acquaint Monsieur and Madame de Morcerf of the arrival of the Count of Monte Cristo. Albert followed him with the Count. When they arrived at the antechamber, above the door was visible a shield which, by its rich ornaments and its harmony with the rest of the furniture, indicated its importance the owner attached to this blazon. Monte Cristo stopped and examined it extensively. "Azure 7 merlets, or place bender," said he. "These are doubtless your family arms? Except the knowledge of blazons, which allows me to decipher them, I am very ignorant of heraldry. I, a count of fresh creation, fabricated in Tuscany by the aid of a commandery of St. Stephen, and who would not have taken the trouble had I not been told that when you travel much it is necessary. Besides, you must have something on the panel of your carriage to escape being searched by the custom-house officers. Excuse my putting such a question to you." "It is not indiscreet," returned Morcerf with the simplicity of conviction. "You have guessed rightly. These are our arms, that is, those of my father, but they are, as you see, joined to another shield which has gules, a silver tower, which are my mother's. By her side I am Spanish, but the family of Morcerf is French, and I've heard one of the oldest of the south of France." "Yes," replied Monte Cristo, "these blazons prove that. Almost all the armed pilgrims that went to the Holy Land took for their arms either a cross, in honour of their mission, or birds of passage, in sign of the long voyage they were about to undertake, and which they hoped to accomplish on the wings of faith. One of your ancestors had joined the Crusades, and supposing it to be only that of Saint Louis, that makes you mount to the 13th century, which is tolerably ancient." "It is possible," said Morcerf. "My father has in his study a genealogical tree which will tell you all that, and which I made commentaries that would have greatly edified Hosier and Joker. At present I no longer think of it, and yet I must tell you that we are beginning to occupy ourselves greatly with these things under our popular government." "Well, then, your government would do well to choose from the past something better than the things that I have noticed on your monuments, and which have no heraldic meaning whatever. As for you, Viscount," continued Monte Cristo to Morcerf, "you are more fortunate than the government, for your arms are really beautiful, and speak to the imagination. Yes, you are at once from Provence and Spain. That explains, if the portrait you showed me be like, the dark hue I so much admired on the visage of the noble Catalan. It would have required the penetration of Oedipus for the Sphinx to have divined the irony the Count concealed beneath these words, apparently uttered with the greatest politeness." Morcerf thanked him with a smile, and pushed open the door, above which were his arms, and which, as we have said, opened into the salon. In the most conspicuous part of the salon was another portrait. It was that of a man, from 5 to 38, in the uniform of a general officer, wearing the double epaulet of heavy bullion that indicates superior rank, the ribbon of the Legion of Honor around his neck, which showed he was a commander, and on the right breast the star of a grand officer of the Order of the Saviour, and on the left that of the Grand Cross of Charles III, which proved that the person represented by the picture had served in the wars of Greece and Spain, or what was just the same thing as regarded decorations, had fulfilled some diplomatic mission in the two countries. Monte Cristo was engaged in examining this portrait, with no less care than he had bestowed upon the other, when another door opened, and he found himself opposite to the Count Morcerf in person. He was a man of 40 to 45 years, but he seemed at least 50, and his black moustache and eyebrows contrasted strangely with his almost white hair, which was cut short in the military fashion. He was dressed in plain clothes, and wore at his buttonhole the ribbons of the different orders to which he belonged. He entered with a tolerably dignified step, and some little haste. Monte Cristo saw him advance towards him without making a single step. It seemed as if his feet were rooted to the ground, and his eyes on the Count of Morcerf. "Father," said the young man, "I have the honour of presenting to you the Count of Monte Cristo, the generous friend whom I had the good fortune to meet in the critical situation of which I have told you." "You are most welcome, monsieur," said the Count of Morcerf, saluting Monte Cristo with a smile, "and monsieur has rendered our house, in preserving its only heir, a service which ensures him our eternal gratitude." As he said these words, the Count of Morcerf pointed to a chair, while he seated himself in another opposite the window. Monte Cristo, in taking the seat Morcerf offered him, placed himself in such a manner as to remain concealed in the shadow of the large velvet curtains, and read on the careworn and livid features of the Count a whole history of secret griefs written in each wrinkle time had planted there. "The Countess," said Morcerf, "was at her toilette when she was informed of the visit she was about to receive. She will, however, be in the salon in 10 minutes." "It is a great honour to me," returned Monte Cristo, "to be thus, on the first day of my arrival in Paris, brought in contact with a man whose merit equals his reputation, and to whom fortune has for once been equitable. But has she not still on the plains of Metidja, or in the mountains of Atlas, a marshal's staff to offer you?" "Oh," replied Morcerf, reddening slightly, "I have left the service, monsieur. Made a peer at the Restoration, I served through the first campaign under the orders of Marshal Bourmont. I could, therefore, expect a higher rank, and who knows what might have happened had the elder branch remained on the throne. But the Revolution of July was, it seems, sufficiently glorious to allow itself to be ungrateful, and it was so for all services that did not date from the imperial period. I tendered my resignation, for when you have gained your epaulettes on the battlefield, you do not know how to manoeuvre on the slippery grounds of the salons. I have hung up my sword and cast myself into politics. I have devoted myself to industry. I studied the useful arts. During the 20 years I served, I often wished to do so, but I had not the time." "These are the ideas that render your nation superior to any other," returned Monte Cristo. "A gentleman of high birth, possessor of an ample fortune, you have consented to gain your promotion as an obscure soldier, step by step. This is uncommon. Then become general, peer of France, commander of the Legion of Honor. You consent to again commence a second apprenticeship, without any other hope or any desire than that of one day becoming useful to your fellow creatures. This indeed is praiseworthy. Nay, more, it is sublime." Albert looked on and listened with astonishment. He was not used to see Monte Cristo give vent to such bursts of enthusiasm. "Alas," continued the stranger, doubtless to dispel the slight cloud that covered Morcerf's brow, "we do not act thus in Italy. We grow according to our race and our species, and we pursue the same lines, and often the same uselessness all our lives. But, monsieur, for a man of your merit, Italy is not a country, and France opens her arms to receive you. Respond to her call. France will not perhaps be always ungrateful. She treats her children ill, but she always welcomes strangers." "Ah, father," said Albert with a smile, "it is evident you do not know the Count of Monte Cristo. He despises all honours, and contents himself with those written on his passport." "That is the most just remark," replied the stranger, "I ever heard made concerning myself." "You have been free to choose your career," observed the Count of Morcerf with a sigh, "and you have chosen the path strewn with flowers." "Precisely, monsieur," replied Monte Cristo, with one of those smiles that a painter could never represent, or a physiologist analyze. "If I did not fear to fatigue you," said the general, evidently charmed with the Count's manners, "I would have taken you to the chamber. There is a debate very curious to those who are strangers to our modern senators. I shall be most grateful, monsieur, if you will, at some future time, renew your offer, but I have been flattered with the hope of being introduced to the Countess, and I will therefore wait." "Ah, here is my mother," cried the Viscount. Monte Cristo turned round hastily and saw Madame de Morcerf at the entrance of the salon, at the door opposite to that by which her husband had entered, pale and motionless. When Monte Cristo turned round, she let fall her arm, which for some unknown reason had been resting on the gilded doorpost. She had been there some moments and had heard the last words of the visitor. The latter rose and bowed to the Countess, who inclined herself without speaking. "Ah, good heavens, madame," said the Count, "are you ill? Or is it the heat of the room that affects you?" "Are you ill, mother?" cried the Viscount, springing towards her. She thanked them both with a smile. "No," returned she, "but I feel some emotion on seeing, for the first time, the man without whose intervention we should have all been in tears and desolation. Monsieur," continued the Countess, advancing with the majesty of a queen, "I owe to you the life of my son, and for this I bless you. Now, I thank you for the pleasure you give me in thus affording me the opportunity of thanking you as I have blessed you, from the bottom of my heart." The Count bowed again, but lower than before. He was even paler than Mercedes. "Madame," said he, "the Count and yourself recompense too generously a simple action. To save a man, to spare a father's feelings or a mother's sensibility, is not to do a good action, but a simple deed of humanity." At these words, uttered with the most exquisite sweetness and politeness, Madame de Morcerf replied, "It is very fortunate for my son, monsieur, that he found such a friend, and I thank God that things are thus." And Mercedes raised her fine eyes to heaven with so fervent an expression of gratitude that the Count fancied he saw tears in them. Monsieur de Morcerf approached her. "Madame," said he, "I have already made my excuses to the Count for quitting him, and I pray you to do so also. The sitting commences at 2, and it is now 3, and I am to speak." "Go then, and monsieur and I will strive our best to forget your absence," said the Countess with the same tone of deep feeling. "Monsieur," continued she, turning to Monte Cristo, "will you do us the honour of passing the rest of the day with us?" "Believe me, madame, I feel most grateful for your kindness, but I got out of my travelling carriage at your door this morning, and I am ignorant how I am installed in Paris, which I scarcely know. This is but a trifling inquietude, I know, but one that may be appreciated." "We shall have the pleasure another time," said the Countess. "You promise that?" Monte Cristo inclined himself without answering, but the gesture might pass for assent. "I will not detain you, monsieur," continued the Countess. "I would not have our gratitude become indiscreet or importunate." "My dear Count," said Albert, "I will endeavour to return your politeness at Rome, and place my coupe at your disposal until your own be ready." "A thousand thanks for your kindness, Viscount," returned the Count of Monte Cristo, "but I suppose that Monsieur Bertuccio has suitably employed the 4 hours and a half I have given him, and that I shall find a carriage of some sort ready at the door." Albert was used to the Count's manner of proceeding. He knew that, like Nero, he was in search of the impossible, and nothing astonished him, but wishing to judge with his own eyes how far the Count's orders had been executed. He accompanied him to the door of the house. Monte Cristo was not deceived. As soon as he appeared in the Count of Morcerf's antechamber, a footman, the same who at Rome had brought the Count's card to the 2 young men, and announced his visit, sprang into the vestibule, and when he arrived at the door, the illustrious traveller found his carriage awaiting him. It was a coupe of Kohler's building, and with horses and harness for which Drake had, to the knowledge of all the lions of Paris, refused on the previous day 700 guineas. "Monsieur," said the Count to Albert, "I do not ask you to accompany me to my house, as I can only show you a habitation fitted up in a hurry, and I have, as you know, a reputation to keep up as regards not being taken by surprise. Give me, therefore, 1 more day before I invite you. I shall then be certain not to fail in my hospitality." "If you ask me for a day, Count, I know what to anticipate. It will not be a house I shall see, but a palace. You have decidedly some genius at your control." "Ma foi, spread that idea," replied the Count of Monte Cristo, putting his foot on the velvet-lined steps of his splendid carriage, "and that will be worth something to me among the ladies." As he spoke he sprang into the vehicle. The door was closed, but not so rapidly that Monte Cristo failed to perceive the almost imperceptible movement which stirred the curtains of the apartment in which he had left Madame de Morcerf. When Albert returned to his mother, he found her, in the boudoir, reclining in a large velvet armchair, the whole room so obscured that only the shining spangle, fastened here and there to the drapery, and the angles of the gilded frames of the pictures showed with some degree of brightness in the gloom. Albert could not see the face of the Countess, as it was covered with a thin veil she put on her head, and which fell over her features in misty folds. But it seemed to him as though her voice had altered. He could distinguish amid the perfumes of the roses and heliotropes and the flower stands the sharp and fragrant odour of volatile salts, and he noticed in one of the chased cups on the mantelpiece the Countess's smelling bottle taken from its shagreen case, and exclaimed in a tone of uneasiness as he entered, "My dear mother, have you been ill during my absence?" No, no, Albert, but you know these roses, tuberoses, and orange flowers throw out at first, before one is used to them, such violent perfumes. Then, my dear mother, said Albert, putting his hand to the bell, they must be taken to the antechamber. You are really ill, and just now were so pale as you came into the room. Was I pale, Albert? Yes, a pallor that suits you admirably, mother, but which did not the less alarm my father and myself. Did your father speak of it? Inquired Mercedes eagerly. No, but do you not remember that he spoke of the fact to you? Yes, I do remember, replied the Countess. A servant entered, summoned by Albert's ring of the bell. Take these flowers into the ante-room or dressing-room, said the Viscount. They make the Countess ill. The footman obeyed his orders. A long pause ensued, which lasted until all the flowers were removed. What is this name of Monte Cristo? Inquired the Countess, when the servant had taken away the last vase of flowers. Is it a family name, or the name of the estate, or a simple title? I believe, mother, it is merely a title. The Count purchased an island in the Tuscan archipelago, and as he told you today, has founded a commandery. You know the same thing was done for St. Stephen of Florence, St. George, Constantinian of Parma, and even for the Order of Malta. Except this, he has no pretension to nobility, and calls himself a chance count, although the general opinion at Rome is that the Count is a man of very high distinction. His manners are admirable, said the Countess, at least as far as I could judge, in the few minutes he remained here. They are perfect, mother, so perfect that they surpass by far all I have known in the leading aristocracy of the three proudest nobilities of Europe, the English, the Spanish, and the German. The Countess paused a moment, then, after a slight hesitation, she resumed. You have seen, my dear Albert, I ask the question as a mother, you have seen Monsieur de Monte Cristo in his house? You are quick-sighted, have much knowledge of the world, more tact than is usual at your age. Do you think the Count is really what he appears to be? What does he appear to be? Why, you have just said, a man of high distinction. I told you, my dear mother, he was esteemed such. But what is your own opinion, Albert? I must tell you that I have not come to any decided opinion respecting him, but I think him a Maltese. I did not ask you of his origin, but what he is. Ah, what he is! That is quite another thing. I have seen many remarkable things in him, but if you would have me really say what I think, I shall reply that I really do look upon him as one of Byron's heroes, whom misery has marked with a fatal brand, some Manfred, some Lara, some Warner, one of those wrecks, as it were, of some ancient family, who, disinherited of their patrimony, have achieved one by the force of their adventurous genius, who has placed them above the laws of society. I say that Monte Cristo is an island in the midst of the Mediterranean, without inhabitants or garrison, the resort of smugglers of all nations and pirates of every flag. Who knows whether or not these industrious worthies do not pay their feudal lord some duties for his protection? That is possible, said the Countess, reflecting. Never mind, continued the young man, smuggler or not, you must agree, dear mother, as you have seen him, that the Count of Monte Cristo is a remarkable man, who will have the greatest success in the salons of Paris. Why, this very morning, in my rooms, he made his entry among us by striking every man of us with amazement, not even excepting Chateau Renaud. And what do you suppose is the Count's age? Inquired Mercedes, evidently attaching great importance to this question. 35 or 36, mother. So young. It is impossible, said Mercedes, replying at the same time to what Albert said as well as to her own private reflection. It is the truth, however. 3 or 4 times he has said to me, and certainly without the slightest premeditation, at such a period I was 5 years old, and at another 10 years old, at another 12, and I, induced by curiosity, which kept me alive to these details, have compared the dates, and never found him inaccurate. The age of this singular man, who is of no age, is then, I am certain, 35. Besides, mother, remark how vivid his eye, how raven-black his hair, and his brow, though so pale, is free from wrinkles. He is not only vigorous, but also young. The Countess bent her head, as if beneath a heavy wave of bitter thoughts. And has this man displayed a friendship for you, Albert? She said, with a nervous shudder. I am inclined to think so. And do you like him? Why, he pleases me in spite of Franz d'Épinay, who tries to convince me that he is a being returned from the other world." The Countess shuddered. "Albert," she said, in a voice which was altered by emotion, "I have always put you on your guard against new acquaintances. Now you are a man, and are able to give me advice. Yet, I repeat to you, Albert, be prudent." "Why, my dear mother, it is necessary, in order to make your advice turn to account, that I should know beforehand what I have to distrust. The Count never plays. He only drinks pure water tinged with a little sherry, and he is so rich that he cannot, without intending to laugh at me, try to borrow money. What, then, have I to fear from him?" "You are right," said the Countess, "and my fears are weakness, especially when directed against a man who has saved your life. How did your father receive him, Albert? It is necessary that we should be more than complaisant to the Count. Monsieur de Morcerf is sometimes occupied, his business makes him reflective, and he might, without intending it—" "Nothing could be in better taste than my father's demeanour, madame," said Albert. "Nay, more, he seemed greatly flattered at 2 or 3 compliments which the Count very skilfully and agreeably paid him with as much ease as if he had known him these 30 years. Each of these little tickling errors must have pleased my father," added Albert with a laugh, "and thus they parted the best possible friends, and Monsieur de Morcerf even wished to take him to the chamber to hear the speakers." The Countess made no reply. She fell into so deep a reverie that her eyes gradually closed. The young man, standing up before her, gazed upon her with that filial affection which is so tender and endearing with children whose mothers are still young and handsome. Then, after seeing her eyes closed and hearing her breathe gently, he believed she had dropped asleep, and left the apartment on tiptoe, closing the door after him with the utmost precaution. "This devil of a fellow," he muttered, shaking his head. "I said at the time he would create a sensation here, and I measure his effect by an infallible thermometer. My mother has noticed him, and he must therefore perforce be remarkable." He went down to the stables, not without some slight annoyance, when he remembered that the Count of Monte Cristo had laid his hands on a turnout which sent his bays down to 2nd place in the opinion of connoisseurs. "Most decidedly," said he, "men are not equal, and I must beg my father to develop this theorem in the Chamber of Peers." End of chapter 41.
Chapter 42. Monsieur Bertuccio. Meanwhile, the Count had arrived at his house. It had taken him 6 minutes to perform the distance, but these 6 minutes were sufficient to induce 20 young men who knew the price of the equipage they had been unable to purchase themselves to put their horses in a gallop in order to see the rich foreigner who could afford to give 20,000 francs apiece for his horses. The house Ali had chosen, and which was to serve as a town residence to Monte Cristo, was situated on the right hand as you ascend the Champs-Élysées. A thick clump of trees and shrubs rose in the centre and masked a portion of the front. Around this shrubbery 2 alleys, like 2 arms, extended right and left, and formed a carriage drive from the iron gates to a double portico, on every step of which stood a porcelain vase filled with flowers. This house, isolated from the rest, had, besides the main entrance, another in the Rue Ponthieu. Even before the coachman had hailed the concierge, the massy gates rolled on their hinges. They had seen the Count coming, and at Paris, as everywhere else, he was served with the rapidity of lightning. The coachman entered and traversed the half-circle without slackening his speed, and the gates were closed ere the wheels had ceased to sound on the gravel. The carriage stopped at the left side of the portico. 2 men presented themselves at the carriage window. The one was Ali, who, smiling with an expression of the most sincere joy, seemed amply repaid by a mere look from Monte Cristo. The other bowed respectfully, and offered his arm to assist the Count in descending. "Thanks, Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count, springing lightly up the 3 steps of the portico. "And the notary?" "He is in the small salon, Excellency," returned Bertuccio. "And the cards I ordered to be engraved as soon as you knew the number of the house?" "Your Excellency, it is done already. I have been myself to the best engraver of the Palais Royal, who did the plate in my presence. The first card struck off was taken, according to your orders, to the Baron Danglers, Rue de la Chaussée-d'Antin, No. 7. The others are on the mantelpiece of your Excellency's bedroom." "Good. What o'clock is it?" "4 o'clock." Monte Cristo gave his hat, cane, and gloves to the same French footman who had called his carriage at the Count of Morcerf's. Then he passed into the small salon, preceded by Bertuccio, who showed him the way. "These are but indifferent marbles in this antechamber," said Monte Cristo. "I trust all this will soon be taken away." Bertuccio bowed. As the steward had said, the notary awaited him in the small salon. He was a simple-looking lawyer's clerk, elevated to the extraordinary dignity of a provincial scrivener. "You are the notary empowered to sell the country house that I wish to purchase, monsieur?" asked Monte Cristo. "Yes, Count," returned the notary. "Is the deed of sale ready?" "Yes, Count." "Have you brought it?" "Here it is." "Very well. And where is this house that I purchase?" asked the Count carelessly, addressing himself half to Bertuccio, half to the notary. The steward made a gesture that signified, "I do not know." The notary looked at the Count with astonishment. "What?" said he. "Does not the Count know where the house he purchases is situated?" "No," returned the Count. "The Count does not know?" "How should I know? I have arrived from Cadiz this morning. I have never before been at Paris, and it is the first time I have ever even set my foot in France." "Ah, that is different. The house you purchase is at Auteuil." At these words Bertuccio turned pale. "And where is Auteuil?" asked the Count. "Close by here, monsieur," replied the notary. "A little beyond Passy, a charming situation, in the heart of the Bois de Boulogne." "So near as that?" said the Count. "But that is not in the country. What made you choose a house at the gates of Paris, Monsieur Bertuccio?" "I!" cried the steward with a strange expression. "His Excellency did not charge me to purchase this house. If His Excellency will recollect, if he will think—" "Ah, true," observed Monte Cristo. "I recollect now. I read the advertisement in one of the papers, and was tempted by the false title, a country house. And if your Excellency will entrust me with the commission, I will find you a better at Enghien, at Fontenay-aux-Roses, or at Bellevue." "Oh no," returned Monte Cristo negligently. "Since I have this, I will keep it." "And you are quite right," said the notary, who feared to lose his fee. "It is a charming place, well supplied with spring water and fine trees, a comfortable habitation, although abandoned for a long time, without reckoning the furniture, which, although old, is yet valuable, now that old things are so much sought after. I suppose the Count has the tastes of the day?" "To be sure," returned Monte Cristo. "It is very convenient, then?" "It is more. It is magnificent." "Peste, let us not lose such an opportunity," returned Monte Cristo. "The deed, if you please, Mr. Notary." And he signed it rapidly, after having first run his eye over that part of the deed in which was specified the situation of the house and the names of the proprietors. "Bertuccio," said he, "give 55,000 francs to monsieur." The steward left the room with a faltering step, and returned with a bundle of banknotes, which the notary counted like a man who never gives a receipt for money until after he is sure it is all there. "And now," demanded the Count, "are all the forms complied with?" "All, sir." "Have you the keys?" "They are in the hands of the concierge, who takes care of the house, but here is the order I have given him to install the Count in his new possessions." "Very well." And Monte Cristo made a sign with his hand to the notary, which said, "I have no further need of you. You may go." "But," observed the honest notary, "the Count is, I think, mistaken. It is only 50,000 francs, everything included." "And your fee?" "Is included in this sum." "But have you not come from Auteuil here?" "Yes, certainly." "Well, then, it is but fair that you should be paid for your loss of time and trouble," said the Count, and he made a gesture of polite dismissal. The notary left the room backwards, and bowing down to the ground. It was the first time he had ever met a similar client. "See this gentleman out," said the Count to Bertuccio. And the steward followed the notary out of the room. Scarcely was the Count alone, when he drew from his pocket a book closed with a lock, and opened it with a key which he wore round his neck, and which never left him. After having sought for a few minutes, he stopped at a leaf which had several notes, and compared them with the deed of sale, which lay on the table. "Auteuil, Rue de la Fontaine, No. 28. It is indeed the same," said he. "And now, am I to rely on an avowal extorted by religious or physical terror? However, in an hour I shall know all. Bertuccio!" cried he, striking a light hammer with a pliant handle on a small gong. "Bertuccio!" The steward appeared at the door. "Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count, "did you never tell me that you had travelled in France?" "In some parts of France, yes, Excellency." You know the environs of Paris, then?" "No, Excellency, no," returned the steward, with a sort of nervous trembling, which Monte Cristo, a connoisseur in all emotions, rightly attributed to great disquietude. "It is unfortunate," returned he, "that you have never visited the environs, for I wish to see my new property this evening, and had you gone with me, you could have given me some useful information." "To Auteuil!" cried Bertuccio, whose copper complexion became livid. "I go to Auteuil!" "Well, what is there surprising in that? When I live at Auteuil, you must come there, as you belong to my service." Bertuccio hung down his head before the imperious look of his master, and remained motionless, without making any answer. "Why, what has happened to you? Are you going to make me ring a second time for the carriage?" asked Monte Cristo, in the same tone that Louis XIV pronounced the famous, "I have been almost obliged to wait." Bertuccio made but one bound to the antechamber, and cried in a hoarse voice, "His Excellency's horses!" Monte Cristo wrote 2 or 3 notes, and, as he sealed the last, the steward appeared. "Your Excellency's carriage is at the door," said he. "Well, take your hat and gloves," returned Monte Cristo. "Am I to accompany you, your Excellency?" cried Bertuccio. "Certainly, you must give the orders, for I intend residing at the house." It was unexampled for a servant of the Count to dare to dispute an order of his, so the steward, without saying a word, followed his master, who got into the carriage, and signed to him to follow, which he did, taking his place respectfully on the front seat. End of chapter 42.
Chapter 43. The House at Auteuil. Monte Cristo noticed, as they descended the staircase, that Bertuccio signed himself in the Corsican manner, that is, had formed the sign of the cross in the air with his thumb, and, as he seated himself in the carriage, muttered a short prayer. Anyone but a man of exhaustless thirst for knowledge would have had pity on seeing the steward's extraordinary repugnance for the Count's projected drive without the walls. But the Count was too curious to let Bertuccio off from this little journey. In 20 minutes they were at Auteuil. The steward's emotion had continued to augment as they entered the village. Bertuccio, crouched in the corner of the carriage, began to examine with a feverish anxiety every house they passed. "Tell them to stop at Rue de la Fontaine, number 28, said the Count, fixing his eyes on the steward, to whom he gave this order. Bertuccio's forehead was covered with perspiration. However, he obeyed, and, leaning out of the window, he cried to the coachman, "Rue de la Fontaine, number 28. Number 28 was situated at the extremity of the village. During the drive night had set in, and darkness gave the surroundings the artificial appearance of a scene on the stage. The carriage stopped, the footman sprang off the box and opened the door. "Well," said the Count, "you do not get out, Monsieur Bertuccio? You are going to stay in the carriage, then? What are you thinking of this evening?" Bertuccio sprang out and offered his shoulder to the Count, who, this time, leaned upon it as he descended the 3 steps of the carriage. "Knock," said the Count, "and announce me." Bertuccio knocked, the door opened, and the concierge appeared. "What is it?" asked he. "It is your new master, my good fellow," said the footman, and he held out to the concierge the notary's order. "The house is sold, then?" demanded the concierge. "And this gentleman is coming to live here?" "Yes, my friend," returned the Count, "and I will endeavour to give you no cause to regret your old master." "Oh, monsieur," said the concierge, "I shall not have much cause to regret him, for he came here but seldom. It is 5 years since he was here last, and he did well to sell the house, for it did not bring him in anything at all." "What was the name of your old master?" said Monte Cristo. "The Marquis of Saint-Méran. Ah, I am sure he has not sold the house for what he gave for it." "The Marquis of Saint-Méran," returned the Count. "The name is not unknown to me. The Marquis of Saint-Méran." And he appeared to meditate. "An old gentleman," continued the concierge, "a stanch follower of the Bourbons. He had an only daughter, who married Monsieur de Villefort, who had been the king's attorney at Nimes and afterwards at Versailles. Monte Cristo glanced at Bertuccio, who became whiter than the wall against which he leaned to prevent himself from falling. "And is not this daughter dead?" demanded Monte Cristo. "I fancy I have heard so." "Yes, monsieur, 21 years ago, and since then we have not seen the poor Marquise 3 times. "Thanks, thanks," said Monte Cristo, judging from the steward's utter prostration that he could not stretch the cord further without danger of breaking it. "Give me a light." "Shall I accompany you, monsieur?" "No, it is unnecessary. Bertuccio will show me a light." And Monte Cristo accompanied these words by the gift of 2 gold pieces, which produced a torrent of thanks and blessings from the concierge. "Ah, monsieur," said he, after having vainly searched on the mantelpiece and the shelves, "I have not got any candles." "Take one of the carriage lamps, Bertuccio," said the Count, "and show me the apartments." The steward obeyed in silence, but it was easy to see, from the manner in which the hand that held the lights trembled, how much it cost him to obey. They went over a tolerably large ground floor. A second floor consisted of a salon, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. Near one of the bedrooms they came to a winding staircase that led down to the garden. "Ah, here is a private staircase," said the Count. "That is convenient. Light me, Monsieur Bertuccio, and go first. We will see where it leads to." "Monsieur," replied Bertuccio, "it leads to the garden." "And pray, how do you know that?" "It ought to do so, at least." "Well, let us be sure of that." Bertuccio sighed, and went on first. The stairs did, indeed, lead to the garden. At the outer door the steward paused. "Go on, Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count. But he who was addressed stood there, stupefied, bewildered, stunned. His haggard eyes glanced around, as if in search of the traces of some terrible event, and with his clenched hands he seemed striving to shut out horrible recollections. "Well?" insisted the Count. "No, no," cried Bertuccio, setting down the lantern at the angle of the interior wall. "No, monsieur, it is impossible. I can go no further." "What does this mean?" demanded the irresistible voice of Monte Cristo. "Why, you must see, your Excellency," cried the steward, "that this is not natural, that, having a house to purchase, you purchase it exactly at Hauteville, and that, purchasing it at Hauteville, this house should be number 28, Rue de la Fontaine. Oh, why did I not tell you all? I am sure you would not have forced me to come. I hoped your house would have been some other one than this. As if there was not another house at Hauteville than that of the assassination." "What? What?" cried Monte Cristo, stopping suddenly. "What words do you utter? Devil of a man, Corsican that you are, always mysteries or superstitions. Come, take the lantern and let us visit the garden. You are not afraid of ghosts with me, I hope." Bertuccio raised the lantern and obeyed. The door, as it opened, disclosed a gloomy sky, in which the moon strove vainly to struggle through a sea of clouds that covered her with billows of vapour, which she illuminated for an instant, only to sink into obscurity. The steward wished to turn to the left. "No, no, monsieur," said Monte Cristo. "What is the use of following the alleys? Here is a beautiful lawn. Let us go on straight forwards." Bertuccio wiped perspiration from his brow, but obeyed. However, he continued to take the left hand. Monte Cristo, on the contrary, took the right hand. Arrived near a clump of trees, he stopped. The steward could not restrain himself. "Move, monsieur, move away, I entreat you. You are exactly in the spot." "What spot?" "Where he fell." "My dear Monsieur Bertuccio," said Monte Cristo, laughing, "control yourself. We are not at Sardinia or at court. This is not the Corsican arbour, but an English garden. Badly kept, I own, but still you must not calumniate it for that. Monsieur, I implore you do not stay there." "I think you are going mad, Bertuccio," said the Count coldly. "If that is the case, I warn you, I shall have you put in a lunatic asylum." "Alas, Excellency," returned Bertuccio, joining his hands and shaking his head in a manner that would have excited the Count's laughter, had not thought of the superior interest occupied him, and rendered him attentive to the least revelation of this timorous conscience. Hail, His Excellency, the evil has arrived. Monsieur Bertuccio, said the Count, I am very glad to tell you that, while you gesticulate, you wring your hands and roll your eyes like a man possessed by a devil who will not leave him. And I have always observed that the devil most obstinate to be expelled is a secret. I knew you were a Corsican. I knew you were gloomy and always brooding over some old history of the vendetta. And I overlooked that in Italy, because in Italy those things are thought nothing of. But in France they are considered in very bad taste. There are gendarmes who occupy themselves with such affairs, judges who condemn, and scaffolds with avenge. Bertuccio clasped his hands, and as, in all these evolutions, he did not let fall the lantern, the light showed his pale and altered countenance. Monte Cristo examined him with the same look that, at Rome, he had bent upon the execution of Andrea, and then, in a tone that made a shudder pass through the veins of the poor steward, "The Abbé Busoni then told me an untruth," said he, "when, after a journey in France in 1829, he sent you to me, with a letter of recommendation, in which he enumerated all your valuable qualities. Well, I shall write to the Abbé. I shall hold him responsible for his protége's misconduct, and I shall soon know all about this assassination. Only I warn you that when I reside in a country, I conform to all its code, and I have no wish to put myself within the compass of the French laws for your sake." "Oh, do not do that, Excellency. I have always served you faithfully," cried Bertuccio in despair. "I have always been an honest man, and, as far as lay in my power, I have done good." "I do not deny it," returned the Count. "But why are you thus agitated? It is a bad sign. A quiet conscience does not occasion such paleness in the cheeks, and such fever in the hands of a man." "But, your Excellency," replied Bertuccio hesitantly, "did not the Abbé Busoni, who heard my confession in the prison at Nimes, tell you that I had a heavy burden upon my conscience?" "Yes, but as he said you would make an excellent steward, I concluded you had stolen, that was all." "Oh, your Excellency," returned Bertuccio in deep content, "or, as you are a Corsican, that you had been unable to resist the desire of making a stiff, as you call it." "Yes, my good master," cried Bertuccio, casting himself at the Count's feet. "It was simply vengeance, nothing else." "I understand that, but I do not understand what it is that galvanizes you in this manner." "But, monsieur, it is very natural," returned Bertuccio, "since it was in this house that my vengeance was accomplished." "What? My house? Oh, your Excellency, it was not yours, then." "Whose, then? The Marquis de Saint Méran, I think the concierge said. What have you to revenge on the Marquis de Saint Méran?" "Oh, it was not on him, monsieur, it was on another." "This is strange," returned the Count, seeming to yield to his reflections, "that you should find yourself without any preparation in a house where the event happened that causes you so much remorse." "Monsieur," said the steward, "it is fatality, I am sure. First, you purchase a house at Hauteville. This house is the one where I have committed an assassination. You descend to the garden by the same staircase by which he descended. You stop at the spot where he received the blow, and 2 paces further is the grave in which he had just buried his child. This is not chance, for chance in this case is too much like Providence." "Well, amiable Corsican, let us suppose it is Providence. I always suppose anything people please, and besides, you must concede something to diseased minds. Come, collect yourself and tell me all." "I have related it but once, and that was to the Abbé Busoni. Such things," continued Bertuccio, shaking his head, "are only related under the seal of confession." "Then," said the Count, "I refer you to your confessor. Turn chartreuse or Trappist, and relate your secrets, but, as for me, I do not like anyone who is alarmed by such phantasms, and I do not choose that my servant should be afraid to walk in the garden of an evening. I confess I am not very desirous of a visit from the commissary of police, for in Italy justice is only paid when silent. In France she is paid only when she speaks. Peste! I thought you somewhat Corsican, a great deal smuggler, and an excellent steward. But I see you have other strings to your bow. You are no longer at my service, Monsieur Bertuccio." "Oh, your Excellency, your Excellency!" cried the steward, struck with terror at this threat. "If that is the only reason I cannot remain in your service, I will tell all, for if I quit you, it will only be to go to the scaffold." "That is different," replied Monte Cristo. "But if you intend to tell an untruth, reflect it were better not to speak at all." "No, monsieur, I swear to you, by my hopes of salvation, I will tell you all, for the Abbé Busoni himself only knew a part of my secret. But, I pray you, go away from that plane tree. The moon is just bursting through the clouds, and there, standing where you do, and wrapped in that cloak that conceals your figure, you remind me of Monsieur de Villefort." "What?" cried Monte Cristo. "It was Monsieur de Villefort? Your Excellency knows him? The former royal attorney at Nimes?" "Yes." "Who married the Marquis of Saint Méran's daughter?" "Yes." "Who enjoyed the reputation of being the most severe, the most upright, the most rigid magistrate on the bench?" "Well, monsieur," said Bertuccio, "this man with his spotless reputation—" "Well?" "Was a villain." "Bah!" replied Monte Cristo. "Impossible! It is as I tell you." "Ah, really?" said Monte Cristo. "Have you proof of this?" "I had it." "And you have lost it. How stupid!" "Yes, but by careful search it might be recovered." "Really?" returned the Count. "Relate it to me, for it begins to interest me." And the Count, humming an air from Lucia, went to sit down on a bench, while Bertuccio followed him, collecting his thoughts. Bertuccio remained standing before him. End of chapter 43. Chapter 44. The Vendetta. "At what point shall I begin my story, your Excellency?" asked Bertuccio. "Where you please," returned Monte Cristo, "since I know nothing at all of it." "I thought the Abbé Busoni had told your Excellency." "Some particulars doubtless, but that is 7 or 8 years ago, and I have forgotten them." "Then I can speak without fear of tiring your Excellency." "Go on, Bertuccio. You will supply the want of the evening papers." "The story begins in 1815. "Ah," said Monte Cristo, "1815 is not yesterday." "No, monsieur, and yet I recollect all things as clearly as if they had happened but then. I had a brother, an elder brother, who was in service of the Emperor. He had become lieutenant in a regiment composed entirely of Corsicans. This brother was my only friend. We became orphans, I at 5, he at 18. He brought me up as if I had been his son, and in 1814 he married. When the Emperor returned from the island of Elba, my brother instantly joined the army, was slightly wounded at Waterloo, and retired with the army behind the Loire. But that is the history of the 100 Days, Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count. "Unless I am mistaken, it has been already written." "Excuse me, Excellency, but these details are necessary, and you promised to be patient." "Go on. I'll keep my word." "One day we received a letter. I should tell you that we lived in the little village of Rogliano, at the extremity of Capecorso. This letter was for my brother. He told us that the army was disbanded, and that he should return by Châteauroux, Clermont-Ferrand, Le Puy, and Nimes, and, if I had any money, he prayed me to leave it for him at Nimes, with an innkeeper with whom I had dealings." "In the smuggling line?" said Monte Cristo. Hey, Your Excellency, everyone must live. Certainly. Go on. I love my brother tenderly, as I told Your Excellency, and I resolved not to send money, but to take it to him myself. I possess 1,000 francs. I left 500 with Assunta, my sister-in-law, and with the other 500 I set off for Nimes. It was easy to do so, and as I had my boat and a landing to take in and see, everything favored my project. But after we had taken in our cargo, the wind became contrary, so that we were 4 or 5 days without being able to enter the Rhone. At last, however, we succeeded, and worked up to Arles. I left the boat between Bellegarde and Beaucaire, and took the road to Nimes. We are getting to the story now. Yes, Your Excellency. Excuse me, but, as you'll see, I only tell you what is absolutely necessary. Just at this time the famous massacres took place in south of France. 3 brigands, called Trestaillon, Trophemy, and Craffin, publicly assassinated everybody whom they suspected of Bonapartism. You have doubtless heard of these massacres, Your Excellency. Vaguely. I was far from France at that period. Go on. As I entered Nimes, I literally waded in blood. At every step you encountered dead bodies and bands of murderers, who killed, plundered, and burned. At sight of this slaughter and devastation I became terrified, not for myself, for I, a simple Corsican fisherman, had nothing to fear. On the contrary, that time was most favorable for us smugglers. But for my brother, a soldier of the Empire, returning from the army of the Loire, with his uniform and his epaulets, there was everything to apprehend. I hastened to the innkeeper. My misgivings had been but too true. My brother had arrived the previous evening at Nimes, and, at the very door of the house where he was about to demand hospitality, he had been assassinated. I did all in my power to discover the murderers, but no one durst tell me their names, so much were they dreaded. I then thought of that French justice of which I had heard so much, and which feared nothing, and I went to the king's attorney. And this king's attorney was named Villefort? Asked Monte Cristo carelessly. Yes, Your Excellency. He came from Marseilles, where he had been deputy procureur. His zeal had procured him advancement, and he was said to be one of the first who had informed the government of the departure from the island of Elba. Then, said Monte Cristo, you went to him. Monsieur, I said, my brother was assassinated yesterday in the streets of Nimes. I know not by whom, but it is your duty to find out. You are the representative of justice here, and it is for justice to avenge those she has been unable to protect. Who was your brother? Asked he. A lieutenant in the Corsican battalion. A soldier of the usurper, then? A soldier of the French army. Well, replied he has smitten with the sword, and he has perished by the sword. You are mistaken, monsieur, I replied. He has perished by the poniard. What do you want me to do? Asked the magistrate. I have already told you. Avenge him. On whom? On his murderers. How should I know who they are? Order them to be sought for. Why, your brother has been involved in a quarrel and killed in a duel. All these old soldiers commit excesses which were tolerated in the time of the emperor, but which are not suffered now, for the people here do not like soldiers of such disorderly conduct. Monsieur, I replied, it is not for myself that I entreat your interference. I should grieve for him or avenge him, but my poor brother had a wife, and were anything to happen to me, the poor creature would perish from want, for my brother's pay alone kept her. Pray, try and obtain a small government pension for her. Every revolution has its catastrophes, returned Monsieur de Villefort. Your brother has been the victim of this. It is a misfortune, and government owes nothing to his family. If we are to judge by all the vengeance that followers of the usurper exercise on the partisans of the king, when in their turn they were in power, your brother would be today, in all probability, condemned to death. What has happened is quite natural, and in conformity with law of reprisals. "What!" cried I, "do you, a magistrate, speak thus to me?" "All these Corsicans are mad, on my honour," replied Monsieur de Villefort. "They fancy that their countryman is still emperor. You have mistaken the time. You should have told me this 2 months ago. It is too late now. Go now at once, or I shall have you put out." I looked at him an instant to see if there was anything to hope from further entreaty. But he was a man of stone. I approached him and said in a low voice, "Well, since you know the Corsicans so well, you know that they always keep their word. You think that this was a good deed to kill my brother, who was a Bonapartist, because you are a royalist. Well, I, who am a Bonapartist also, declare one thing to you, which is, that I will kill you. From this moment I declared vendetta against you, so protect yourself as well as you can, for the next time we meet your last hour has come." And before he had recovered from his surprise, I opened the door and left the room. "Well, well," said Monte Cristo, "such an innocent-looking person as you are to do those things, Monsieur Bertuccio, and to a king's attorney at that. But did he know what was meant by the terrible word vendetta?" "He knew so well that from that moment he shut himself in his house and never went out unattended, seeking me high and low. Fortunately, I was so well concealed that he could not find me. Then he became alarmed, and dared not stay any longer at Nimes, so he solicited a change of residence, and, as he was in reality very influential, he was nominated to Versailles. But, as you know, a Corsican who has sworn to avenge himself cares not for distance, so his carriage, fast as it went, was never above half a day's journey before me, who followed him on foot. The most important thing was, not to kill him only, for I had an opportunity of doing so 100 times, but to kill him without being discovered, at least without being arrested. I no longer belonged to myself, for I had my sister-in-law to protect and provide for. For 3 months I watched Monsieur de Villefort. For 3 months he took not a step out of doors without my following him. At length I discovered that he went mysterious to Auteuil. I followed him thither, and I saw him enter the house where we now are, only instead of entering by the great door that looks into the street, he came on horseback, or in his carriage, left one or the other at a little inn, and entered by the gate you see there." Monte Cristo made a sign with his head to show that he could discern in the darkness the door to which Bertuccio alluded. As I had nothing more to do at Versailles, I went to Auteuil, and gained all the information I could. If I wished to surprise him, it was evident it was the spot to lie in wait for him. The house belonged, as the concierge informed you, Excellency, to Monsieur de Saint-Méran, Villefort's father-in-law. Monsieur de Saint-Méran lived at Marseilles, so that this country house was useless to him, and it was reported to be let to a young widow, known only by the name of the Baroness. One evening, as I was looking over the wall, I saw a young and handsome woman who was walking alone in the garden, which was not overlooked by any windows, and I guessed that she was awaiting Monsieur de Villefort. When she was sufficiently near for me to distinguish her features, I saw she was from 18 to 19, tall and very fair. As she had a loose muslin dress on, and as nothing concealed her figure, I saw she would ere long before become a mother. A few moments after, the little door was opened and a man entered. The young woman hastened to meet him. They threw themselves into each other's arms, embraced tenderly, and returned together to the house. The man was Monsieur de Villefort. I fully believed that when he went out in the night he would be forced to traverse the whole of the garden alone. "And," asked the Count, "did you ever know the name of this woman?" "No, Excellency," returned Bertuccio. "You will see that I had no time to learn it. Go on." "That evening," continued Bertuccio, "I could have killed the procureur, but as I was not sufficiently acquainted with the neighborhood, I was fearful of not killing him on the spot, and that if his cries were overheard I might be taken. So I put it off until the next occasion, and in order that nothing should escape me, I took a chamber looking into the street border by the wall of the garden. 3 days after, about 7 o'clock in the evening, I saw a servant on horseback leave the house at full gallop and take the road to Sèvres. I concluded that he was going to Versailles, and I was not deceived. 3 hours later the man returned covered with dust, his errand was performed, and 2 minutes after, another man on foot, muffled in a mantle, opened the little door of the garden, which he closed after him. I descended rapidly. Although I had not seen Villefort's face, I recognized him by the beating of my heart. I crossed the street, and stopped at a post placed at the angle of the wall, and by means of which I had once before looked into the garden. This time I did not content myself with looking, but I took my knife out of my pocket, felt that the point was sharp, and sprang over the wall. My first care was to run to the door. He had left the key in it, taking the simple precaution of turning it twice in the lock. Nothing then preventing my escape by this means, I examined the ground. The garden was long and narrow. A stretch of smooth turf extended down the middle, and at the corners were clumps of trees with thick and massy foliage that made a background for the shrubs and flowers. In order to go from the door to the house, or from the house to the door, Monsieur de Villefort would be obliged to pass by one of these clumps of trees. It was the end of September. The wind blew violently. The faint glimpses of the pale moon, hidden momentarily by masses of dark clouds that were sweeping across the sky, whitened the gravel walks that led to the house, but were unable to pierce the obscurity of the thick shrubberies, in which a man could conceal himself without any fear of discovery. I hid myself in the one nearest to the path Villefort must take, and scarcely was I there when, amidst the gust of wind, I fancied I heard groans. But you know, or rather you do not know, your Excellency, that he who is about to commit an assassination fancies that he hears low cries perpetually ringing in his ears. 2 hours passed thus, during which I imagined I heard moans repeatedly. Midnight struck. As the last stroke died away, I saw a faint light shine through the windows of the private staircase by which we had just descended. The door opened, and the man in the mantle reappeared. The terrible moment had come, but I had so long been prepared for it that my heart did not fail in the least. I drew my knife from my pocket again, opened it, and made ready to strike. The man in the mantle advanced towards me, but as he drew near, I saw that he had a weapon in his hand. I was afraid, not of a struggle, but of a failure. When he was only a few paces from me, I saw that what I had taken for a weapon was only a spade. I was still unable to divine for what reason Monsieur de Villefort had his spade in his hand, when he stopped close to the thicket where I was, glanced round, and began to dig a hole in the earth. I then perceived that he was hiding something under his mantle, which he laid on the grass in order to dig more freely. Then, I confess, curiosity mingled with hatred. I wished to see what Villefort was going to do there, and I remained motionless, holding my breath. Then an idea crossed my mind, which was confirmed when I saw the procureur lift from under his mantle a box 2 feet long and 6 or 8 inches deep. I let him place the box in the hole he had made. Then, while he stamped with his feet to remove all traces of his occupation, I rushed on him and plunged my knife into his breast, exclaiming, "I am Giovanni Bertuccio, thy death for my brothers, thy treasure for his widow. Thou seest that my vengeance is more complete than I had hoped." I know not if he heard these words. I think he did not, for he fell without a cry. I felt his blood gush over my face, but I was intoxicated, I was delirious, and the blood refreshed instead of burning me. In a second I had disinterred the box. Then, that it might not be known I had done so, I filled up the hole, threw the spade over the wall, and rushed through the door, which I double-locked, carrying off the key. "Ah," said Monte Cristo, "it seems to me this was nothing but murder and robbery." "No, your Excellency," returned Bertuccio. "It was a vendetta followed by restitution." "And was the sum a large one?" "It was not money." "Ah, I recollect," replied the Count. "Did you not say something of an infant?" "Yes, Excellency. I hastened to the river, sat down on the bank, and with my knife forced open the lock of the box. In a fine linen cloth was wrapped a new-born child. Its purple visage and its violet-colored hands showed that it had perished from suffocation, but it was not yet cold. I hesitated to throw it in the water that ran at my feet. After a moment I fancied that I felt a slight pulsation of the heart, and as I had been assistant at the hospital at Bastia, I did what a doctor would have done. I inflated the lungs by blowing air into them, and at the expiration of a quarter of an hour it began to breathe, and cried feebly. In my turn I uttered a cry, but a cry of joy. 'God has not cursed me, then,' I cried, 'since he permits me to save the life of a human creature in exchange for the life I have taken away.'" "And what did you do with the child?" asked Monte Cristo. It was an embarrassing lot for a man seeking to escape. "I had not for a moment the idea of keeping it, but I knew that at Paris there was an asylum where they received such creatures. As I passed the city gates, I declared that I had found the child on the road, and I inquired where the asylum was. The box confirmed my statement, the linen proved the infant belonged to wealthy parents, the blood with which I was covered might have proceeded from the child as well as from anyone else. No objection was raised, but they pointed out the asylum, which was situated at the upper end of the Rue d'Enfer, and after having taken the precaution of cutting the linen into pieces, so that one of the two letters which marked it was on the piece wrapped around the child, while the other remained in my possession, I rang the bell and fled with all speed. A fortnight after, I was at Trogliano, and I said to Assunta, "Console thyself, sister, Israel is dead, but he is avenged." She demanded what I meant, and when I had told her all, "Giovanni," said she, "you should have brought this child with you. You would have replaced the parents it has lost, have called it Benedetto, and then, in consequence of this good action, God would have blessed us." In reply I gave her the half of the linen I had kept in order to reclaim him if he became rich. "What letters were marked on the linen?" said Monte Cristo. "An H and an N, surmounted by a baron's coronet." "By heaven, Monsieur Bertuccio, you make use of heraldic terms. Where did you study heraldic?" "In your service, Excellency, where everything is learned." "Go on. I am curious to know two things." "What are they, your Excellency?" "What became of this little boy? For I think you told me it was a boy, Monsieur Bertuccio." "No, Excellency, I do not recollect telling you that." "I thought you did. I must have been mistaken." "No, you were not, for it was in reality a little boy. But your Excellency wished to know two things. What was the second?" "The second was the crime of which you were accused when you asked for a confessor, and the Abbé Busoni came to visit you at your request in the prison at Nimes." "The story will be very long, Excellency." "What matter? You know I take but little sleep, and I do not suppose you are very much inclined for it either." Bertuccio bowed, and resumed his story. "Partly to drown the recollections of the past that haunted me, partly to supply the wants of the poor widow, I eagerly returned to my trade of smuggler, which had become more easy since that relaxation of the laws which always follows a revolution. The southern districts were ill watched in particular, in consequence of the disturbances that were perpetually breaking out in Avignon, Nimes, or Uzes. We profited by this respite on the part of the government to make friends everywhere. Since my brother's assassination in the streets of Nimes, I had never entered the town. The result was that the innkeeper with whom we were connected, seeing that we would no longer come to him, was forced to come to us, and had established a branch to his inn, on the road from Bellegarde to Beaucaire, at the sign of the Pont du Gard. We had thus, at Aix-Mortes, Martigues, or Beauc, a dozen places where we left our goods, and where, in case of necessity, we concealed ourselves from gendarmes and custom-house officers. Smuggling is a profitable trade, when a certain degree of vigor and intelligence is employed. As for myself, brought up in the mountains, I had a double motive for fearing the gendarmes and custom house officers, as my appearance before the judges would cause an inquiry, and an inquiry always looks back into the past. And in my past life they might find something far more grave than the selling of smuggled cigars or barrels of brandy without a permit. So, preferring death to capture, I accomplished most astonishing deeds, and which, more than once, showed me that too great care we take of our bodies is the only obstacle to the success of those projects which require rapid decision and vigorous and determined execution. In reality, when you have once devoted your life to your enterprises, you are no longer the equal of other men, or rather, other men are no longer your equals, and whosoever has taken this resolution feels his strength and resources doubled. Philosophy, Monsieur Bertuccio, interrupted the Count. You have done a little of everything in your life. Oh, Excellency! No, no, but philosophy at 10:30 at night is somewhat late. Yet I have no other observation to make, for what you say is correct, which is more than can be said for all philosophy. My journeys became more and more extensive and more productive. Assunta took care of all, and our little fortune increased. One day, as I was setting off on an expedition, "Go," said she. "At your return I will give you a surprise." I questioned her, but in vain. She would tell me nothing, and I departed. Our expedition lasted nearly 6 weeks. We had been to Lucca to take in oil, to Leghorn for English cottons, and we ran our cargo without opposition, and returned home full of joy. When I entered the house, the first thing I beheld in the middle of Assunta's chamber was a cradle that might be called sumptuous compared with the rest of the furniture, and in it a baby 7 or 8 months old. I uttered a cry of joy. The only moments of sadness I had known since the assassination of the procureur were caused by the recollection that I had abandoned this child. For the assassination itself I had never felt any remorse. Poor Assunta had guessed all. She had profited by my absence, and furnished with half of the linen, and having written down the day and hour at which I had deposited the child at the asylum, had set off for Paris, and had reclaimed it. No objection was raised, and the infant was given up to her. Ah, I confess, Your Excellency, when I saw this poor creature sleeping peacefully in its cradle, I felt my eyes filled with tears. "Ah, Assunta," cried I, "you are an excellent woman, and heaven will bless you." "This," said Monte Cristo, "is less correct than your philosophy. It is only faith." "Alas, your Excellency is right," replied Bertuccio, "and God made this infant the instrument of our punishment. Never did a perverse nature declare itself more prematurely, and yet it was not owing to any fault in its bringing up. He was a most lovely child, with large blue eyes, of that deep color that harmonizes so well with the blonde complexion. Only his hair, which was too light, gave his face a most singular expression, and added to the vivacity of his look and the malice of his smile. Unfortunately, there is a proverb which says that red is either altogether good or altogether bad. The proverb was but too correct as regarded Benedetto, and even in his infancy he manifested the worst disposition. It is true that the indulgence of his foster mother encouraged him. This child, for whom my poor sister would go to the town, 5 or 6 leagues off, to purchase the earliest fruits and most tempting sweetmeats, prefers to Palma grapes or Genoese preserves, the chestnuts stolen from a neighbor's orchard, or the dried apples in his loft, when he could eat as well of the nuts and apples that grew in my garden. One day, when Benedetto was about 5 or 6, our neighbor Basilio, who, according to the custom of the country, never locked up his purse or his valuables, for, as your Excellency knows, there are no thieves in Corsica, complained that he had lost a louis out of his purse. We thought he must have made a mistake in counting his money, but he persisted in the accuracy of this statement. One day Benedetto, who had been gone from the house since morning, to our great anxiety, did not return until late in the evening, dragging a monkey after him, which he said he had found chained to the foot of a tree. For more than a month past, the mischievous child, who knew not what to wish for, had taken it into his head to have a monkey. A boatman, who had passed by Rogliano, and who had several of these animals, whose tricks had greatly diverted him, had, doubtless, suggested this idea to him. "Monkeys are not found in our woods chained to trees," said I. "Confess how you obtained this animal." Benedetto maintained the truth of what he had said, and accompanied it with details that did more honor to his imagination than to his veracity. I became angry. He began to laugh. I threatened to strike him, and he made 2 steps backwards. "You cannot beat me," said he. "You have no right, for you are not my father." We never knew who had revealed this fatal secret, which he had so carefully concealed from him. However, it was this answer, in which the child's whole character revealed itself, that almost terrified me, and my arm fell without touching him. The boy triumphed, and this victory rendered him so audacious that all the money of Assunta, whose affection for him seemed to increase as he became more unworthy of it, was spent in caprices she knew not how to contain against, and follies she had not courage to prevent. When I was at Rogliano, everything went on properly, but no sooner was my back turned than Benedetto became master, and everything went ill. When he was only 11, he chose his companions from among the young men of 18 or 20, the worst characters in Bastia, or indeed in Corsica, and they had already, for some mischievous pranks, been several times threatened with the prosecution. I became alarmed, as any prosecution might be attended with serious consequences. I was compelled, at this period, to leave Corsica on an important expedition. I reflected for a long time, and with the hope of averting some impending misfortune, I resolved that Benedetto should accompany me. I hoped that the active and laborious life of a smuggler, with severe discipline on board, would have a salutary effect on his character, which was now well nigh, if not quite, corrupt. I spoke to Benedetto alone, and proposed to him to accompany me, endeavouring to tempt him by all the promises most likely to dazzle the imagination of a child of 12. He heard me patiently, and when I had finished, burst out laughing. "Are you mad, uncle?" He called me by this name when he was in good humour. "Do you think I am going to change the life I lead for your mode of existence? My agreeable indolence for the hard and precarious toil you impose on yourself, exposed to the bitter frost at night, and scorching heat by day, compelled to conceal yourself, and when you are perceived, receive a volley of bullets, all to earn a paltry sum. Why, I have as much money as I want. Mother Assunta always furnishes me when I ask for it. You see that I should be a fool to accept your offer." The arguments and his audacity perfectly stupefied me. Benedetto rejoiced his associates, and I saw him from a distant point meow to them as a fool. "Sweet child," murmured Monte Cristo. "Oh, had he been my own son," replied Bertuccio, "or even my nephew, I would have brought him back to the right road, for the knowledge that you are doing your duty gives you strength, but the idea that I was striking a child whose father I had killed made it impossible for me to punish him. I gave my sister, who constantly defended the unfortunate boy, good advice, and as she confessed that she had several times missed money to a considerable amount, I showed her a safe place in which to conceal our little treasure for the future. My mind was already made up. Benedetto could read, write, and cipher perfectly, for when defeat seized him, he learned more in a day than others in a week. My intention was to enter him in a clerk in some ship, and without letting him know anything of my plan, to convey him some morning on board. By this means his future treatment would depend upon his own conduct. I set off for France, after having fixed upon the plan. Our cargo was to be landed in the Gulf of Lyons, and this was a difficult thing to do, because it was the year 1829. The most perfect tranquillity was restored, and the vigilance of the custom-house officers, was redoubled, and their strictness was increased at this time, in consequence of the fair at Beaucaire. Our expedition made a favorable beginning. We anchored our vessel, which had a double hold, where our goods were concealed, amidst a number of other vessels that bordered the banks of the Rhone from Beaucaire to Arles. On our arrival, we began to discharge our cargo in the night, and to convey it into the town, by the help of the innkeeper with whom we were connected. Whether success rendered us imprudent, or whether we were betrayed, I know not. But one evening, about 5 o'clock, our little cabin boy came breathlessly to inform us that he had seen a detachment of custom-house officers advancing in our direction. It was not their proximity that alarmed us, for detachments were constantly patrolling along the banks of the Rhone, but the care, according to the boy's account, that they looked to avoid being seen. In an instant we were on the alert, but it was too late. Our vessel was surrounded, and amongst the custom-house officers I observed several gendarmes, and, as terrified at sight of their uniforms as I was brave at sight of any other, I sprang into the hold, opened the port, and dropped into the river, dived, and only rose at intervals to breathe, until I reached a ditch that had recently been made from the Rhone to the canal that runs from Beaucaire to Aix-Mortes. I was now safe, for I could swim along the ditch without being seen, and I reached the canal in safety. I had decidedly taken this direction. I have already told your Excellency of an innkeeper from Nimes who had set up a little tavern on the road from Bellegarde to Beaucaire. Yes, said Monte Cristo, I perfectly recollect him. I think he was your colleague. Precisely, answered Bertuccio. But he had, 7 or 8 years before this period, sold his establishment to a tailor at Marseilles, who, having almost ruined himself in his old trade, wished to make his fortune in another. Of course, we made the same arrangement with the new landlord that we had with old, and it was of this man that I intended to ask shelter. What was his name? Inquired the Count, who seemed to become somewhat interested in Bertuccio's story. Gaspard Caderousse. He had married a woman from the village of Carcont, and whom he did not know by any other name than that of her village. She was suffering from malarial fever, and seemed dying by inches. As for her husband, he was a strapping fellow of 40 or 45, who had more than once, in time of danger, given ample proof of his presence of mind and courage. And you say, interrupted Monte Cristo, that this took place towards the year 1829, your Excellency. In what month? June. The beginning or the end? The evening of the 3rd. Ah, said Monte Cristo, the evening of the 3rd of June, 1829. Go on. It was from Caderousse that I intended demanding shelter, and, as we never entered by the door that opened onto the road, I resolved not to break through the rule, so climbing over the garden edge, I crept among the olive and wild fig trees, and fearing that Caderousse might have some guest, I entered a kind of shed in which I had often passed the night, and which was only separated from the inn by a partition, in which holes had been made in order to enable us to watch an opportunity of announcing our presence. My intention was, if Caderousse was alone, to acquaint him with my presence, finish the meal the custom-house officers had interrupted, and profit by the threatened storm to return to the Rhone, and ascertain the state of our vessel and its crew. I stepped into the shed, and it was fortunate I did so, for at that moment Caderousse entered with a stranger. I waited patiently, not to overhear what they said, but because I could do nothing else. Besides, the same thing had occurred often before. The man who was with Caderousse was evidently a stranger to the south of France. He was one of those merchants who come to sell jewellery at Beaucaire Fair, and who during the month the fair lasts, and during which there is so great an influx of merchants and customers from all parts of Europe, often have dealings to the amount of 100,000 to 150,000 francs. Caderousse entered hastily. Then, seeing that the room was, as usual empty and only guarded by the dog, he called to his wife. "Hello, Carconte," said he. "The worthy priest has not deceived us. The diamond is real." An exclamation of joy was heard, and the staircase cracked beneath a feeble step. "What do you say?" asked his wife, pale as death. "I say that the diamond is real, and that this gentleman, one of the first jewelers of Paris, will give us 50,000 francs for it. Only, in order to satisfy himself that it really belongs to us, he wishes us to relate to him, as I have done already, the miraculous manner in which the diamond came into our possession. In the meantime, please to sit down, monsieur, and I will fetch you some refreshment." The jeweller examined attentively the interior of the inn, and the apparent poverty of the persons who were about to sell him a diamond that seemed to have come from the casket of a prince. "Relate your story, madame," said he, wishing, no doubt, to profit by the absence of the husband, so that later could influence the wife's story, to see if the recitals tallied. "Oh," returned she, "it was a gift of heaven. My husband was a great friend, in 1814 or 1815, of a sailor named Edmond Dantes. This poor fellow, whom Caderousse had not forgotten him, and at his death he bequeathed this diamond to him." "But how did he obtain it?" asked the jeweller. "Had he it before he was in prison?" "No, monsieur, but it appears that in prison he made the acquaintance of a rich Englishman, and as in prison he fell sick, and Dantes took the same care of him as if he had been his brother, the Englishman, when he was set free, gave the stone to Dantes, who, less fortunate, died, and in his turn left it to us, and charged the excellent abbé who was here this morning to deliver it." "The same story," muttered the jeweller, "and improbable as it seemed at first, it may be true. There's only the price we are not agreed about." "How not agreed about?" said Caderousse. "I thought we agreed for the price I asked." "That is," replied the jeweller, "I offered 40,000 francs." 40,000! cried La Carconte. "We will not part with it for that sum. The abbé told us it was worth 50,000 without setting." "What was the abbé's name?" asked the indefatigable questioner. "The Abbé Busoni," said La Carconte. "He was a foreigner?" "An Italian, from the neighborhood of Mantua, I believe." "Let me see this diamond again," replied the jeweller. "The first time you are often mistaken as to the value of a stone." Caderousse took from his pocket a small case of black shagreen, opened, and gave it to the jeweller. At the sight of the diamond, which was as large as a hazelnut, La Carconte's eyes sparkled with cupidity. "And what did you think of this fine story, eavesdropper?" said Monte Cristo. "Did you credit it?" "Yes, your Excellency. I did not look on Caderousse as a bad man, and I thought him incapable of committing a crime or even a theft." "That did more honor to your heart and to your experience, Monsieur Bertuccio. Had you known this Edmond Dantes of whom they spoke?" "No, your Excellency. I had never heard of him before, and never but once afterwards, and that was from the Abbé Busoni himself when I saw him in the prison at Nimes. Go on." The jeweller took the ring, and drawing from his pocket a pair of steel pliers and a small set of cobbler's scales, he took the stone out of its setting and weighted it carefully. "I'll give you 45,000, said he, "but not a soul more. Besides, as that is the exact value of the stone, I brought just that sum with me." "Oh, that's no matter," replied Caderousse. "I'll go back with you to fetch the other 5,000 francs." "No," returned the jeweller, giving back the diamond and the ring to Caderousse. "No, it is worth no more, and I am sorry I offered so much, for the stone has a flaw in it, which I had not seen. However, I will not go back on my word, and I will give 45,000. "At least replace the diamond in the ring," said La Carconte sharply. "Ah, true," replied the jeweller, "and here is that stone." "No matter," observed Caderousse, replacing the box in his pocket. "Someone else will purchase it." "Yes," continued the jeweller, "but someone else will not be so easy as I am, or content himself with the same story. It is not natural that a man like you should possess such a diamond. He will inform against you. You will have to find the Abbé Busoni, and abbeys who give diamonds worth 2,000 louis are rare. The law would seize it, and put you in prison. If at the end of 3 or 4 months you are set at liberty, the ring will be lost, or a false stone worth 3 francs will be given you, instead of a diamond worth 50,000 or perhaps 55,000 francs, from which you must allow that one runs considerable risk in purchasing." Caderousse and his wife looked eagerly at each other. "No," said Caderousse, "we are not rich enough to lose 5,000 francs." "As you please, my dear sir," said the jeweller. "I have, however, as you see, brought you the money in bright coin." And he drew from his pocket a handful of gold, and held it sparkling before the dazzled eyes of the innkeeper, and in the other hand he held a packet of banknotes. There was evidently a severe struggle in the mind of Caderousse. It was plain that the small shagreen case, which he turned over and over in his hand, did not seem to him commensurate in value to the enormous sum which fascinated his gaze. He turned towards his wife. "What do you think of this?" he asked in a low voice. "Let him have it, let him have it," she said. "If he returns to Beaucaire without the diamond, he will inform against us, and, as he says, who knows if we shall ever again see the Abbé Busoni? In all probability we shall never see him." "Well, then, so I will," said Caderousse, "so you may have the diamond for 45,000 francs." "But my wife wants a gold chain, and I want a pair of silver buckles." The jeweller drew from his pocket a long flat box, which contained several samples of the articles demanded. "Here," he said, "I am very straightforward in my dealings. Take your choice." The woman selected a gold chain worth about 5 louis, and the husband a pair of buckles, worth perhaps 15 francs. "I hope you'll not complain now," said the jeweller. "The abbé told me it was worth 50,000 francs," muttered Caderousse. "Come, come, give it to me. What a strange fellow you are," said the jeweller, taking the diamond from his hand. "I give you 45,000 francs, that is, 2,500 livres of income, a fortune such as which I have myself, and you are not satisfied." "And 45,000 francs?" inquired Caderousse in a hoarse voice. "Where are they?" "Come, let us see them." "Here they are," replied the jeweller, and he counted out upon the table 50,000 francs in gold and 30,000 francs in banknotes. "Wait while I light the lamp," said La Carconte. "It is growing dark, and there may be some mistake." In fact, night had come on during this conversation, and with night the storm which had been threatening for the last half-hour. The thunder growled in the distance, but it was apparently not heard by the jeweller. Caderousse or La Carconte, absorbed as they were all three with the demon of gain. I myself felt a strange kind of fascination at the sight of all this gold and all these banknotes. It seemed to me that I was in a dream, and, as it always happens in a dream, I felt myself riveted to the spot. Caderousse counted and again counted the golden notes, then handed them to his wife, who counted and counted them again in her turn. During this time the jeweller made the diamond play and sparkle in the lamplight, and the gem threw out jets of light which made him unmindful of those which, precursors of the storm, began to play in it at the windows. "Well," inquired the jeweller, "is the cash all right?" "Yes," said Caderousse. "Give me the pocket-book, La Carconte, and find the bag somewhere." La Carconte went to a cupboard, and returned with an old leather pocket-book and a bag. From the former she took some greasy letters, and put in their place the banknotes, and from the bag took 2 or 3 crowns of 6 livres each, which, in all probability, formed the entire fortune of the miserable couple. "There," said Caderousse, "and now, although you have wronged us perhaps 10,000 francs, will you have supper with us? I invite you with good will." "Thank you," replied the jeweller. "I must be getting late, and I must return to Beaucaire. My wife will be getting uneasy." He drew out his watch and exclaimed, "Morbleu, nearly 9 o'clock. Why, I shall not get back to Beaucaire before midnight. Good night, my friends. If the Abbé Busoni should by any accident return, think of me." "In another week you'll have left Beaucaire," remarked Caderousse, "for the fair ends in a few days." "True, but that makes no difference. Write to me at Paris, to Monsieur Joannes, in the Palais Royal, Arcade Pierre, number 45. I will make the journey on purpose to see him, if it is worth while." At this moment there was a tremendous clap of thunder, accompanied by a flash of lightning so vivid that it quite eclipsed the light of the lamp. "See here," exclaimed Caderousse, "you cannot think of going out in such weather as this." "Oh, I'm not afraid of thunder," said the jeweller. "And then there are robbers," said La Carconte. "The road is never very safe during fair time." "Oh, as to the robbers," said Joannes, "here is something for them," and he drew from his pocket a pair of small pistols, loaded to the muzzle. "Here," said he, "are dogs who bark and bite at the same time. They are for the 2 first who shall have a longing for your diamond, friend Caderousse." Caderousse and his wife again interchanged a meaning look. It seemed as though they were both inspired at the same time with some horrible thought. "Well, then, a good journey to you," said Caderousse. "Thanks," replied the jeweller. He then took his cane, which he had placed against an old cupboard, and went out. At the moment when he opened the door, such a gush of wind came in that the lamp was nearly extinguished. "Oh," said he, "this is very nice weather, and 2 leagues to go in such a storm." "Remain," said Caderousse. "You can sleep here." "Yes, do stay," added La Carconte in a tremulous voice. "We'll take every care of you." "No, I must sleep at Beaucaire, so, once more, good night." Caderousse followed him slowly to the threshold. "I can see neither heaven nor earth," said the jeweller, who was outside the door. "Do I turn to the right or to the left hand?" "To the right," said Caderousse. "You cannot go wrong. The road is bordered by trees on both sides." "Good. All right," said a voice almost lost in the distance. "Close the door," said La Carconte. "I do not like open doors when it thunders." "Particularly when there is money in the house, eh?" answered Caderousse, double-locking the door. He came into the room, went to the cupboard, took out the bag and pocket-book, and both began, for the 3rd time, to count their gold and bank-notes. I never saw such an expression of cupidity as the flickering lamp revealed in those 2 countenances. The woman especially was hideous. Her usually feverish tremulous was intensified, her countenance had become livid, and her eyes resembled burning coals. "Why," she inquired in a hoarse voice, "did you invite him to sleep here tonight?" "Why?" said Caderousse with a shudder. "Why, that he might not have the trouble of returning to Beaucaire." "Ah," responded the woman with an expression impossible to describe. "I thought it was for something else." "Woman, woman, why do you have such ideas?" cried Caderousse. "Or, if you have them, why don't you keep them to yourself?" "Well," said La Carconte after a moment's pause, "you are not a man." "What do you mean?" added Caderousse. "If you had been a man, you would not have let him go from here." "Woman!" "Or else he should not have reached Beaucaire." "Woman! The road takes a turn, he is obliged to follow it, while alongside of the canal there is a shorter road." "Woman! You offend the good God. There, listen." And at this moment there was a tremendous peal of thunder, while the livid lighting illuminated the room, and thunder, rolling away in the distance, seemed to withdraw unwillingly from the cursed abode. "Mercy," said Caderousse, crossing himself. At the same moment, and in the midst of the terrifying silence which usually follows the clap of thunder, they heard a knocking at the door. Caderousse and his wife started and looked aghast at each other. "Who's there?" cried Caderousse, rising, and drawing up in a heap the gold and notes scattered over the table, and which he covered with his two hands. "It is I," shouted a voice. "And who are you?" "Pardieu, Joannes, the jeweller." "Well, and you said I offended the good God," said Lacarcante with a horrid smile. "Why, the good God sends him back again." Caderousse sank pale and breathless into his chair. Lacarcante, on the contrary, rose, and going with a firm step towards the door, opened it, saying as she did so, "Come in, dear Monsieur Joannes." "Ma foi," said the jeweller, drenched with rain, "I am not destined to return to Beaucaire tonight. The shortest follies are best, my dear Caderousse. You offered me hospitality and I accepted, and I have returned to sleep beneath your friendly roof." Caderousse stammered out something, while he wiped away the sweat that started to his brow. Lacarcante double-locked the door behind the jeweller. End of chapter 43. Chapter 45. Drain of Blood. As the jeweller returned to the apartment, he cast around him a scrutinizing glance, but there was nothing to excite suspicion if it did not exist, or to confirm it if it were already awakened. Caderousse's hand still grasped the gold and bank-notes, and Lacarcante called up her sweetest smiles while welcoming the reappearance of their guest. "Well, well," said the jeweller, "you seem, my good friends, to have had some fears respecting the accuracy of your money, by counting it over so carefully directly as I was gone." "Oh, no," answered Caderousse, "that was not my reason, I can assure you. But circumstances by which we have become possessed of this wealth are so unexpected as to make us scarcely credit our good fortune, and it is only by placing the actual proof of our riches before our eyes that we can persuade ourselves that all affairs is not a dream." The jeweller smiled. "Have you any other guests in your house?" inquired he. "Nobody but ourselves," replied Caderousse. "The fact is, we do not lodge travellers. Indeed, our tavern is so near the town that nobody would think of stopping here." "Then I am afraid I shall very much inconvenience you." "Inconveniences! Not at all, my dear sir," said Lacarcante in her most gracious manner. "Not at all, I assure you." "But where will you manage to stow me?" "In the chamber overhead." "Surely, that is where you yourself sleep." "Never mind that. We have had a second bed in the adjoining room." Caderousse stared at his wife with much astonishment. The jeweller, meanwhile, was humming a song as he stood warming his back at the fire Lacarcante had kindled to dry the wet garments of her guest; and this done, she next occupied herself in arranging his supper by spreading a napkin at the end of the table, and placing on it slender remains of their dinner, to which she added 3 or 4 fresh-laid eggs. Caderousse had once more parted with his treasure. The banknotes were replaced in the pocket-book, the gold put back into the bag, and all carefully locked in the cupboard. He then began pacing the room with a pensive and gloomy air, glancing from time to time at the jeweller, who stood drinking with steam from his wet clothes, and merely changing his place on the warm earth to enable the whole of his garments to be dried. "There," said Lacarcante, as she placed a bottle of wine on the table. "Supper is ready whenever you are." "And you?" asked Joannes. "I don't want any supper," said Caderousse. "We dine so very late," hastily interposed La Carconte. "Then it seems I am to eat alone," remarked the jeweller. "Oh, we shall have the pleasure of waiting upon you," answered La Carconte, with an eager attention she was not accustomed to manifest even to guests who paid for what they took. From time to time Caderousse darted on his wife keen, searching glances, but rapid as lightning flash. The storm still continued. "There, there," said La Carconte. "Do you hear that? Upon my word, you did well to come back." "Nevertheless," replied the jeweller, "if by the time I have finished my supper the tempest has at all abated, I shall make another start." "It's the mistral," said Caderousse, "and it will be sure to last till tomorrow morning." He sighed heavily. "Well," said the jeweller, as he placed himself at table, "all I can say is, so much the worse for those who are abroad." "Yes," chimed in La Carconte, "they will have a wretched night of it." The jeweller began eating his supper, and the woman, who was ordinarily so careless and indifferent to all who approached her, was suddenly transformed into the most smiling and attentive hostess. Had the unhappy man on whom she lavished her assiduities been previously acquainted with her, so sudden an alteration might well have excited suspicion in his mind, or at least have greatly astonished him. Caderousse, meanwhile, continued to pace the room in gloomy silence, tediously avoiding the sight of his guests. But as soon as the stranger had completed his repast, the agitated innkeeper went eagerly to the door and opened it. "I believe the storm is over," said he. But, as if to contradict this statement, at that instant a violent clap of thunder seemed to shake the house to its very foundation, while a sudden gust of wind, mingled with rain, extinguished the lamp he held in his hand. Trembling and awe-struck, Caderousse hastily shut the door and returned to his guest, while La Carconte lighted a candle by the smouldering ashes that glimmered on the earth. "You must be tired," said she to the jeweller. "I have spread a pair of white sheets on your bed. Go up when you are ready, and sleep well." Joanne stayed for a while to see whether the storm seemed to abate in its fury, but a brief space of time sufficed to assure him that, instead of diminishing, the violence of the rain and thunder momentarily increased. Resigning himself, therefore, to what seemed inevitable, he bade his host good night and mounted the stairs. He passed over my head, and I heard the flooring creak beneath his footsteps. The quick, eager glance of La Carconte followed him as he ascended, while Caderousse, on the contrary, turned his back and seemed most anxiously to avoid even glancing at him. All these circumstances did not strike me as painfully at the time as they have since done. In fact, all that had happened, with the exception of the story of the diamond, which certainly did wear an air of improbability, appeared natural enough, and called for neither apprehension nor mistrust. But, worn out as I was with fatigue, and fully proposing to proceed onwards directly the tempest abated, I determined to obtain a few hours' sleep. Overhead I could actually distinguish every movement of the jeweller, who, after making the best arrangements in his power for passing a comfortable night, threw himself on his bed, and I could hear it break and groan beneath his weight. Insensibly my eyelids grew heavily. Deep sleep stole over me, and having no suspicion of anything wrong, I sought not to shake it off. I looked at the kitchen once more, and saw Caderousse sitting by the side of a long table upon one of the low wooden stools, which in country places are frequently used instead of chairs. His back was turned towards me, so that I could not see the expression of his countenance. Neither should I have been able to do so had he been placed differently, as his head was buried between his two hands. La Carconte continued to gaze on him for some time. Then, shrugging her shoulders, she took her seat immediately opposite to him. At this moment the expiring embers threw up a fresh flame from the kindling of a piece of wood that lay near, and a bright light flashed over the room. La Carconte still kept her eyes fixed on her husband, but as he made no sign of changing his position, she extended her hard, bony hand and touched him on the forehead. Caderousse shuddered. The woman's lips seemed to move, as though she were talking, but because she merely spoke in an undertone, or my senses were dulled by sleep, I did not catch a word she uttered. Confused sights and sounds seemed to float before me, and gradually I fell into a deep, heavy slumber. How long I had been in this unconscious state I know not, when I was suddenly aroused by the report of a pistol, followed by a fearful cry. Weak and tottering footsteps resounded across the chamber above me, and next instant a dull, heavy weight seemed to fall powerless on the staircase. I had not yet fully recovered consciousness when again I heard groans, mingled with half-stifled cries, as if from persons engaged in a deadly struggle. A cry more prolonged than the others, and ending in a series of groans, effectually roused me from my drowsy lethargy. Hastily raising myself on one arm, I looked around, but all was dark, and it seemed to me as if the rain must have penetrated through the flooring of the room above, for some kind of moisture appeared to fall, drop by drop, upon my forehead, and when I passed my hand across my brow, I felt that it was wet and clammy. To the fearful noises that had awakened me had succeeded the most perfect silence, unbroken save by the footsteps of a man walking about in the chamber above. The staircase creaked. He descended into the room below, approached the fire, and lit a candle. The man was Caderousse. He was pale, and his shirt was all blood. Having obtained the light, he hurried upstairs again, and once more I heard his rapid and uneasy footsteps. A moment later he came down again, holding in his hand a small shagreen case, which he opened to assure himself it contained the diamond, seemed to hesitate as to which pocket he should put it in, then, as if dissatisfied with the security of the other pocket, he deposited in his red handkerchief, which he carefully rolled round his head. After this, he took from his cupboard the banknotes and gold he had put there, thrust one into the pocket of his trousers and the other into that of his waistcoat, hastily tied up a small bundle of linen, and rushing towards the door, disappeared in the darkness of the night. Then all became clear and manifest to me, and I reproached myself with what had happened, as though I myself had done the guilty deed. I fancied that I still heard faint moans, and imagining that the unfortunate jeweller might not be quite dead, I determined to go to his relief by way of atoning in some slight degree, not for the crime I had committed, but for that which I had not endeavoured to prevent. For this purpose I applied all the strength I possessed to force an entrance from the cramped spot in which I lay to the adjoining room. The poorly fastened boards which alone divided me from it yielded to my efforts, and I found myself in the house. Hastily snatching up the lighted candle, I hurried to the staircase. About midway a body was lying across the stairs. It was that of La Carconte. The pistol I had heard had doubtless been fired at her. The shot had frightfully lacerated her throat, leaving two gaping wounds from which, as well as the mouth, the blood was pouring in floods. She was stone dead. I strode past her and descended into the sleeping chamber, which presented an appearance of the wildest disorder. The furniture had been knocked over in the deadly struggle that had taken place there, and the sheets, to which the unfortunate jewellery had doubtless clung, were dragged across the room. The murdered man lay on the floor, his head leaning against the wall, and about him was a pool of blood which poured forth from 3 large wounds in his breast. There was a fourth gash, in which a long table knife was plunged up to the handle. I stumbled over some object. I stopped to examine. It was the second pistol, which had not gone off, probably from the powder being wet. I approached the jeweller, who was not quite dead, and at the sound of my footsteps and the creaking of the door, he opened his eyes, fixed them on me with an anxious and inquiring gaze, moved his lips, as though trying to speak, then, overcome by the effort, fell back and expired. This appalling sight almost bereft me of my senses, and finding that I could no longer be of service to anyone in the house, my only desire was to fly. I rushed towards the staircase, clutching my hair and uttering a groan of horror. Upon reaching the room below, I found 5 or 6 custom-house officers and 2 or 3 gendarmes, all heavily armed. They threw themselves upon me. I made no resistance. I was no longer master of my senses. When I strove to speak, a few inarticulate sounds alone escaped my lips. As I noticed the significant manner in which the whole party pointed to my blood-stained garments, I involuntarily surveyed myself, and then I discovered that the thick warm drops that had so bedwetted me as I lay beneath the staircase must have been the blood of La Carconte. I pointed to the spot where I had concealed myself. "What does he mean?" asked a gendarme. One of the officers went to the place I had directed. "He means," replied the man upon his return, "that he got in that way." And he showed the hole I had made when I broke through. Then I saw that they took me for the assassin. I recovered force and energy enough to free myself from the hands of those who held me, while I managed to stammer forth, "I did not do it. Indeed I did not." A couple of gendarmes held the muzzles of their carbines against my breast. "Stubborn a step," said they, "and you are a dead man." "Why should you threaten me with death," cried I, "when I have already declared my innocence?" "Tush, tush," cried the man, "keep your innocent stories to tell to the judge at Nimes. Meanwhile, come along with us, and the best advice we can give you is to do so unresistingly." Alas, resistance was far from my thought. I was utterly overpowered by surprise and terror, and without a word I suffered myself to be handcuffed and tied to a horse's tail, and thus they took me to Nimes. I had been tracked by a customs officer, who had lost sight of me near the tavern. Feeling certain that I intended to pass the night there, he had returned to summon his comrades, who just arrived in time to hear the report of the pistol, and to take me in the midst of such circumstantial proofs of my guilt, and rendered all hopes of proving my innocence utterly futile. One only chance was left me, that of beseeching the magistrate before whom I was taken to cause every inquiry to be made for the Abbé Busoni, who had stopped at the inn of the Pont du Gard that morning. If Caderousse had invented the story relative to the diamond, and there existed no such person as the Abbé Busoni, then, indeed, I was lost past redemption, or, at least, my life hung upon the feeble chance of Caderousse himself being apprehended and confessing the whole truth. 2 months passed away in hopeless expectation on my part, while I must do the magistrate justice to say that he used every means to obtain information of the person I declared could exculpate me if he could. Caderousse still evaded all pursuit, and I had resigned myself to what seemed my inevitable fate. My trial was to come on at the approaching assizes, when, on the 8th of September, that is to say, precisely 3 months and 5 days after the events which had perilled my life, the Abbé Busoni, whom I never ventured to believe I should see, presented himself at the prison doors, saying he understood one of the prisoners wished to speak to him. He added, that having learned at Marseilles the particulars of my imprisonment, he hastened to comply with my desire. You may easily imagine with what eagerness I welcomed him, and how minutely I related the whole of what I had seen and heard. I felt some degree of nervousness as I entered upon the history of the diamond, but, to my inexpressible astonishment, he confirmed it in every particular, and to my equal surprise, he seemed to place entire belief in all I said. And then it was that, won by his mild charity, seeing that he was acquainted with all the habits and customs of my own country, and considering also that pardon for the only crime of which I was really guilty might come with a double power from lips so benevolent and kind, I besought him to receive my confession, under the seal of which I recounted the Auteuil affair in all its details, as well as every other transaction of my life. That which I had done by the impulse of my best feelings produced the same effect as though it had been the result of calculation. My voluntary confession of the assassination at Arteville proved to him that I had not committed that of which I stood accused. When he quitted me, he bade me of good courage, and to rely upon his doing all in his power to convince my judges of my innocence. I had speedy proofs that the excellent abbé was engaged in my behalf, for the rigours of my imprisonment were alleviated by many trifling though acceptable indulgences, and I was told that my trial was to be postponed to the assizes following those now being held. In the interim, it pleased Providence to cause the apprehension of Caderousse, who was discovered in some distant country, and brought back to France, where he made a full confession, refusing to make the fact of his wife's having suggested and arranged murder an excuse for his own guilt. The wretched man was sentenced to the galleys for life, and I was immediately set at liberty. "And then it was, I presume," said Monte Cristo, "that you came to me as the bearer of a letter from Abbé Busoni." "It was, your Excellency. The benevolent abbé took an evident interest in all that concerned me." "Your mode of life as a smuggler," said he to me one day, "will be the ruin of you. If you get out, don't take it up again." "But how," inquired I, "am I to maintain myself and my poor sister?" "A person whose confessor I am," replied he, "and who entertains a high regard for me, applied to me a short time since to procure him a confidential servant. Would you like such a post? If so, I will give you a letter of introduction to him." "Oh, father," I exclaimed, "you are very good." "But you must first tell me that I shall never have reason to repent my recommendation." I extended my hand, and was about to pledge myself by any promise he would dictate, but he stopped me. "It is unnecessary for you to bind yourself by any vow," said he. "I know and admire the Corsican nature too well to fear you. Here, take this," continued he. "After rapidly writing a few lines I brought to your Excellency, and upon receipt of which you deigned to receive me into your service, and proudly I ask whether your Excellency has ever had cause to repent having done so." "No," replied the Count. "I take pleasure in saying that you have served me faithfully, Bertuccio. But you might have shown more confidence in me." "I, your Excellency?" "Yes, you. How comes it that, having both a sister and an adopted son, you have never spoken to me of either?" "Alas, I have still to recount the most distressing period of my life. Anxious as you might suppose I was to behold and comfort my dear sister, I lost no time in hastening to Corsica. But when I arrived at Rogliano, I found a house of mourning, the consequences of a scene so horrible that neighbors remember and speak of it to this day. Acting by my advice, my poor sister had refused to comply with the unreasonable demands of Benedetto, who was continually tormenting her for money, as long as he believed there was a soul left in her possession. One morning that he had demanded money, threatening her with the severest consequences if she did not supply him with what he desired, he disappeared and remained away all day, leaving the kind-hearted Assunta, who loved him as if he were her own child, to weep over his conduct and bewail his absence. Evening came, and still, with all the patient solicitude of a mother, she watched for his return. As the 11th hour struck, he entered with swaggering air, attended by two of the most dissolute and reckless of his boon companions. She stretched out her arms to him, but they seized hold of her, and one of the three, none other than the accursed Benedetto, exclaimed, "Put her to torture, and she'll soon tell us where her money is." It unfortunately happened that our neighbor, Basilio, was at Bastia, leaving no person in his house but his wife. No human creature beside could hear or see anything that took place within our dwelling. Two held poor Assunta, who, unable to conceive that any harm was intended to her, smiled in the face of those who were soon to become her executioners. The third proceeded to barricade the doors and windows, then returned, and the three, united in stifling the cries of terror incited by the sight of these preparations, and then dragged Assunta feet foremost towards the brazier, expecting to wring from her an avowal of where her supposed treasure was secreted. In the struggle, her clothes caught fire, and they were obliged to let go their hold in order to preserve themselves from sharing the same fate. Covered with flames, Assunta rushed wildly to the door, but it was fastened. She flew to the windows, but they were also secured. Then the neighbors heard frightful shrieks. It was Assunta calling for help. The cries died away in groans, and next morning, as soon as Basilio's wife could muster up courage to venture abroad, she caused the door of our dwelling to be opened by the public authorities, when Assunta, although dreadfully burned, was found still breathing. Every drawer and closet in the house had been forced open, and the money stolen. Benedetto never again appeared at Rogliano, neither have I since that day either seen or heard anything concerning him. It was subsequently to this dreadful event that I waited on your Excellency, to whom it would have been folly to have mentioned Benedetto, since all trace of him seemed entirely lost, or of my sister, since she was dead. "And in what light did you view the occurrence?" inquired Monte Cristo. "As a punishment for the crime I had committed," answered Bertuccio. "Oh, those Villeforts are an accursed race!" "Truly they are," murmured the Count in a lugubrious tone. "And now," resumed Bertuccio, "your Excellency may, perhaps, be able to comprehend that this place, which I revisit for the first time, this garden, the actual scene of my crime, must have given rise to reflections of no very agreeable nature, and produced that gloom and repression of spirit which excited the notice of your Excellency, who was pleased to express a desire to know the cause. At this instant a shudder passes over me as I reflect that possibly I am now standing on the very grave in which lies Monsieur de Villefort, by whose hand the ground was dug to receive the corpse of his child." "Everything is possible," said Monte Cristo, rising from the bench on which he had been sitting. "Even," he added in an inaudible voice, "even that procureur be not dead. The Abbé Busoni did right to send you to me." He went on in his ordinary tone, "And you have done well in relating to me the whole of your history, as it will prevent my forming any erroneous opinion concerning you in future. As for that Benedetto, who so grossly belied his name, have you never made any effort to trace out whither he has gone, or what has become of him?" "No. Far from wishing to learn whither he has betaken himself, I should shun the possibility of meeting him as I would a wild beast. Thank God, I have never heard his name mentioned by any person, and I hope and believe he is dead." "Do not think so, Bertuccio," replied the Count, "for the wicked are not so easily disposed of, for God seems to have them under his special watch care, to make of them instruments of his vengeance." "So be it," responded Bertuccio. "All I ask of heaven is that I may never see him again. And now, your Excellency," he added, bowing his head, "you know everything. You are my judge on earth as the Almighty is in heaven. Have you for me no words of consolation?" "My good friend, I can only repeat the words addressed to you by the Abbé Busoni. Villefort merited punishment for what he had done to you, and perhaps to others. Benedetto, if still living, will become the instrument of divine retribution in some way or other, and then be duly punished in his turn. As far as you yourself are concerned, I see but one point in which you are really guilty. Ask yourself wherefore, after rescuing the infant from its living grave, you did not restore it to its mother. There was the crime, Bertuccio. That was where you became really culpable." "True, Excellency, that was the crime, the real crime, for in that I acted like a coward. My first duty, directly I had succeeded in recalling the babe to life, was to restore it to its mother. But, in order to do so, I must have made close and careful inquiry, which would, in all probability, have led to my own apprehension. And I clung to life, partly on my sister's account, and partly from that feeling of pride inborn in our hearts of desire to come off untouched and victorious in the execution of our vengeance. Perhaps, too, the natural and instinctive love of life made me wish to avoid endangering my own. And then, again, I am not as brave and courageous as was my poor brother." Bertuccio hid his face in his hands as he uttered these words, while Monte Cristo fixed on him a look of inscrutable meaning. After a brief silence, rendered still more solemn by the time and place, the Count said, in a tone of melancholy wholly unlike his usual manner, "In order to bring this conversation to a fitting termination, the last we shall ever hold upon this subject, I will repeat to you some words I have heard from the lips of the Abbé Busoni. For all evils there are two remedies, time and silence. And now leave me, Monsieur Bertuccio, to walk alone here in the garden. The very circumstances which inflict on you, as a principal in this tragic scene enacted here, such painful emotions, are to me, on the contrary, a source of something like contentment, and serve but to enhance the value of this dwelling in my estimation. The chief beauty of trees consists in the deep shadow of their embroidered boughs, while fancy pictures a moving multitude of shapes and forms fleeting and passing beneath that shade. Here I have a garden laid out in such a way as to afford the fullest scope of the imagination, and furnished with thickly grown trees, beneath whose leafy screen a visionary like myself may conjure up phantoms at will. This to me, who expected but to find the blank enclosure surrounded by a straight wall, is, I assure you, a most agreeable surprise. I have no fear of ghosts, and I have never heard it said that so much harm had been done by the dead during 6,000 years as it wrought by the living in a single day. Retire within, Bertuccio, and tranquilize your mind. Should your confessor be less indulgent to you in your dying moments than you found the Abbé Busoni, send for me, if I am still on earth, and I will soothe your ears with words that shall effectually calm and soothe your parting soul, ere it goes forth to traverse the ocean called eternity." Bertuccio bowed respectfully, and turned away, sighing heavily. Monte Cristo, left alone, took 3 or 4 steps onwards, and murmured, "Here, beneath this plane tree, must have been where the infant's grave was dug. There is a little door opening into the garden. At this corner is a private staircase communicating with sleeping apartment. There will be no necessity for me to make a note of these particulars, for there, before my eyes, beneath my feet, all around me, I have the plain sketch with all the living reality of truth." After making the tour of the garden a second time, the Count re-entered his carriage, while Bertuccio, who perceived the thoughtful expression of his master's features, took his seat beside the driver without uttering a word. The carriage proceeded rapidly towards Paris. That same evening, upon reaching his abode in Champs-Élysées, the Count of Monte Cristo went over the old building with the air of one long acquainted with each nook or corner. Nor, although preceding the party, did he once mistake one door for another, or commit the smallest error when choosing any particular corridor or staircase to conduct him to a place or suite of rooms he desired to visit. Ali was his principal attendant during this nocturnal survey. Having given various orders to Bertuccio relative to the improvements and alterations he desired to make in the house, the Count, drawing out his watch, said to the attentive Nubian, "It is 11:30. Haydée will soon be here. Had the fresh attendants been summoned to await her coming?" Ali extended his hands towards the apartments destined for the fair Greek, which were so effectually concealed by means of a tapestried entrance that it would have puzzled most curious to have divined their existence. Ali, having pointed to the apartments, held up 3 fingers of his right hand, and then, placing it beneath his head, shut his eyes, and feigned to sleep. "I understand," said Monte Cristo, well acquainted with Ali's pantomime. You mean to tell me that 3 female attendants await their new mistress in their sleeping chamber?" Ali, with considerable animation, made a sign in the affirmative. "Madame will be tired tonight," continued Monte Cristo, "and will, no doubt, wish to rest. Desired fresh attendants not to weary her with questions, but merely to pay their respectful duty and retire. You will also see that the Greek servants hold no communication with those of this country." He bowed. Just at that moment voices were heard hailing the concierge. The gate opened, a carriage rolled down the avenue and stopped at the steps. The Count hastily descended, presented himself at the already opened carriage door, and held out his hand to a young woman, completely enveloped in a green silk mantle heavily embroidered with gold. She raised the hand extended towards her to her lips, and kissed it with a mixture of love and respect. Some few words passed between them in that sonorous language in which Homer makes his gods converse. The young woman spoke with an expression of deep tenderness, while the Count replied with an air of gentle gravity. Preceded by Ali, who carried a rose-colored flambeau in his hand, the newcomer, who was no other than the lovely Greek who had been Monte Cristo's companion in Italy, was conducted to her apartments, while the Count retired to the pavilion reserved for himself. In another hour every light in the house was extinguished, and it might have been thought that all its inmates slept. End of chapter 45.